All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this BiTS seminar for October. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Brendan Lee, who's the CEO and founder of Elas. And he is also the chief of content for the Bitcoin Association. And his talk today will be about the efficiency and utility of a massively scalable proof of work. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Brendan.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I've got some notes here on my laptop, and so it's decided instead of going to sleep that it would like to reboot. Okay, so I guess I'll start with a little bit about myself. I'm born here in Brisbane. I went to school here. I went to university at UQ. I have two kids who go to school here in Toowong, and I've worked on a variety of jobs across the control systems industry, mining, manufacturing, energy storage, and then since 2017 got into Bitcoin, went down the rabbit hole, and I really haven't looked back since. And as I said, in 2017, I started my Bitcoin journey. First step, I bought some cryptos for my self-managed super fund. My career was a little bit stalled. I wanted to try something different. So then I launched a product. I called it Safe Words. It was a product for custodial storage of mnemonic seeds for crypto wallets. I don't own the product anymore, but you can still buy it at www.coinstorage.guru if that's something that you're interested in. But really, since 2018, when I met James Belding and was asked to join a team competing for a £5 million prize to create an open source token protocol on at the time was called the Bitcoin Cash Network. So it was put up by this gentleman here, Calvin Ayre, and Tokenized actually won that prize. That product that has become tokenized. So if you are looking at tokenizing securities, I strongly urge you to check out their website. It's just tokenized.com. They are also based here in Queensland, down the Gold Coast, and they have a very stellar product. I did not go on to work with them, so I started doing two other jobs, one for a small consultancy called Fire, where we started working on the Tuvalu National Digital Ledger project, and one at the Bitcoin Association, where I'm the chief of content and develop a lot of their academic materials. So in 2020, I left Fire and started Elas, which I run today. So we're a company who offer what we think is state-of-the-art blockchain as a service utilities. And that includes creating private ledgers, tokens, anything that you like, all on top of public blockchain infrastructure. And we do that using a combination of our own technology and technology from other companies in the space. In my spare time, I like to read, especially for the last 2 years, I've been studying philosophy from a great teacher. I don't know if any of you know who this guy is. This is Dr. Craig Wright. He actually invented Bitcoin. And a lot of people would deny him the right to that claim. But I've known Craig for a long time, and in my mind, it's 100% certain that this is the man who is behind the invention. So our philosophical discussions are all up on YouTube. If you do want to go and check them out, I was up at 5 a.m. this morning recording a new one, so they're all up there for everyone. So anyway, what we're about is big blocks. And big blocks, you know, I often get asked why. What is it about BSV? You know, isn't it a scam? The price only goes down. Aren't you worried about losing all your money? Well, I don't buy BSV. I don't buy any cryptos. I recommend that none of you buy any cryptos. It's a bit of a predatory industry. To me, Bitcoin SV is Bitcoin. It is the system that follows the design laid out in Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. Bitcoin is just BTC with all of the crud removed. And once you see this, it becomes impossible not to see that the world's largest crypto, BTC, which is labeled by a lot of the markets as Bitcoin, is not Bitcoin, but actually a scam. And it's just there to inject money into the cryptocurrency industry, which is really a ruthlessly predatory industry fleecing investors. Very few people understand the true intent of the system. And most of the industry's so-called experts are really just snake oil salesmen selling broken ideas. And what I see across all of crypto is that the idea of cryptocurrency or the idea of decentralization, I should say, has really been weaponized into something that artificially restricts all of these blockchain platforms from ever reaching a global audience. So separate from these industries, from this industry and delisted from most of the exchanges out there, there's only one blockchain that's being engineered for global audiences, and that's Bitcoin SV. So let me give you some numbers. 4 gigabyte blocks. That has become almost commonplace since this whopper was mined back in February, but there's routinely several 4 gigabyte blocks each day at this time. The average fee paid in this block was 5/1000th of a cent, but you can make transactions for about 1/1000th of a cent. So you do the maths, that's about $10 per million transactions. And you can do anything you like in those transactions. 320 megabytes is the size of the largest transaction ever mined. And there are many other stats that I could give you. We'll go into those a bit later in the talk. But it's important to listen to the whole message. Crypto's promise is a total mess. Right now, there are there used to be over 10,000, but there are now almost 10,000 cryptos registered on CoinMarketCap. None of them scale to even a fraction, None of them scale to even a fraction of what is required to deliver on the promise of the original Bitcoin. Side chains, second layer networks, and all these different bridges and stable coins are needed to create, but they create a usability and security nightmare where nobody's goods are safe. Popular mantras such as not your keys, not your coins, and code is law directly contradict the concepts of ownership rights and law that have been established through thousands of years of civil society. Importantly, Bitcoin is not a tool of destruction. It was never created to end the banks. It was never created to somehow crash the government. It was there to make them accountable, to bring honesty into the system, to incentivize them to be honest with us. And to use it effectively, you must understand that it is a tool, not a financial investment product. So, I'll just get to my notes. So Satoshi was explicit in his definition in the white paper, and in his subsequent communications about the nature of Bitcoin as a highly scalable time-stamping system for transactions using tokens controlled with digital signatures. Nodes timestamp transactions into blocks which are distributed across the network for validation. Preventing double spends without a central authority is the key innovation. And to scale the network and build miner revenue, blocks must grow with demand. So Bitcoin is not crypto. How many of you believe that the crypto market is manipulated? Yeah, most of you. Most people see the top level manipulation, but crypto really is run by what I would have referred to in my previous engineering roles as a bunch of cowboy outfits who have, keep doing that. I'll get back to, there we go. Bunch of cowboy outfits. They have zero regard for safety, they have zero regard for regulations, they have zero regard for the people who get rolled up in their schemes. They shamelessly create scams and repeats of scams in an effort to draw money into the system. Just look at recent bankruptcies, including Celsius and Kraken, where executives essentially withdrew all of the liquid assets into their own personal wallets before shutting down the companies. This is not rare. This is not even fit to be called a bastardization of the original idea of Bitcoin. I always like to say that Satoshi managed to bottle lightning, while crypto is out there selling empty jars. The industry is predatory and parasitic. And twice now, crypto has tried to destroy Bitcoin by forcing the network to adopt new rules. Thankfully, the system is resilient, and twice, directional changes have been avoided through aggressive defense. And by aggressive defense, we mean moving to completely new networks. So first in 2017, the network was transferred to a new node called Bitcoin Cash. And then in 2018, a further hash war split Bitcoin Cash into Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. I was there in London when this happened. I have the t-shirt. And in fact, I helped my friend Eston create a robot, which we called the Satoshi Shotgun, which we used in a well-publicized exhibition to blast the post-hash war BSV network with millions of transactions, which we used to hopefully make a big block. What actually happened was that the degraded Bitcoin SV network completely fell over, destroying every wallet and service connected to it. It took us 36 hours to make things right. But what has emerged, so Eston has taken the Satoshi Shotgun, and we now use that every day on the scaling testnet, where it generates billions of transactions in order to test the scaling infrastructure that we are using to underpin the network. And what has come from that rigorous testing is a network that routinely mines 4 gigabyte blocks with millions of transactions in them, and has recently set records for sizes of individual transactions, individual blocks. So this is a network that is built to scale, plain and simple. But what is scale? So 7.8 billion people in the world. Let's round that up to 10. 100 transactions per person per day. And let's assume that, transactions include things like phone calls, emails. So getting to 100 per person per day isn't that hard. That's 1 trillion transactions total per day, or about 11.6 million transactions per second. Bitcoin works with a 10-minute block time. So that is about 6.9 billion transactions per block. If each transaction is around 250 bytes, which is about the size of a cash transaction, that is 1.7 terabytes of transactional data every 10 minutes. But in reality, the true number will be far higher, as transactions are unlimited in size, and there will be enterprises using big data. There will be many other use cases beyond cash, beyond email, things that we haven't even imagined yet. And so the system scales to accommodate any usage demand. And so, what is scale? We get to a situation where the engine that drives the scale has to accommodate any demand. And so the goal is always to be many times ahead of the demand in terms of the capacity. So scale is relative. And I always try to look at Bitcoin from the perspective of a fully scaled system. So there's no point in considering the incentives when we look at today's demand, because today's demand isn't even a tiny fraction of what the eventual demand will be. And so when we try to model the economics of the system, it's important to look at the fully scaled system. So in that fully scaled system, even if each transaction costs just 1/1000th of a cent, which is the price today, 1 trillion transactions still generates $100 million today in revenue, or roughly $700,000 every 10 minutes. This makes mining a $37 billion a year industry, and that is without consideration of even one single value-add service. That's just processing transactions. So this is when the true economics of proof of work emerge. So Can I ask, who believes there will be multiple blockchains? Right. How many?
10 or so.
Okay. And how many transactions per second on each of those blockchains?
I will say one around 1,500.
1,500. So that's about 15,000 transactions per second. So this is still many times higher than where most of these blockchains are today. So if we were to get to what I'm saying, which is 10 million transactions per second, we need around, 7,000 of those blockchains working together. And so just to accommodate basic transactions for 10 billion people / entities. So plus the effort and complication of maintaining 10,000 different systems, bridges between those systems, and more. So multiple blockchains are a vision that is really fraught and ripe for exploitation. And that's where we see a lot of the exploitation is happening in those bridges between the blockchains. It is possible for one single blockchain using the original Bitcoin system architecture and design to work across all use cases and scale to a full global transactional load at a price that goes down. So I don't know if you can see that. The price goes down over time as usage goes up. And even as the price goes down, revenue still climbs because the usage goes up so steeply. So this is what Satoshi Nakamoto designed, and it was always intended to scale to millions of transactions per second. And in fact, we'll eventually get to billions of transactions per second. And once we start looking at payment channels and non-final transactions and parallel transaction processing, we can get even much further beyond that. So what about decentralization? Isn't that important? So crypto would have you believe that decentralization means keeping the blockchain tiny so that everyone can keep a copy. They even invented the blockchain trilemma in this neat little diagram to cement this idea as truth. How many of you are familiar with the blockchain trilemma? Okay. How many of you believe it's true? Okay, that's good. The trilemma states that it's impossible for a blockchain to have security, decentralization, and stability at the same time. They're basically trying to say that if you don't limit the capacity of your network, it won't be possible for its users to keep a complete copy of the blockchain, which will somehow impact its security. But reality forces us to acknowledge a different truth. Without scalability, a blockchain can't be secure. The model of decentralization upon which the fallacy is based has no basis in computer science or economics. I mean, I walk around with a terabyte in my pocket. The fact that the world's biggest blockchain can't mine more than 1 megabyte every 10 minutes is frankly ridiculous. This fallacy was created to convince people that they need to buy more different cryptos. It is in this context that the first pillar of the trilemma falls over. Why does every blockchain need to be tiny if I'm going to need full copies of every single one that I use anyway? It is also here that the second pillar can be shown to have fallen over many times also. If having many tiny blockchains is somehow more secure than having one blockchain that does everything, then transferring from one blockchain to another should be more secure. But the reality is that it is these bridging layers where most of these hacks take place. The reality is that the decentralization offered by Bitcoin is not what they're talking about in this blockchain trilemma. It is the ability to transact peer-to-peer without going via a centralized third party. And you don't need the whole blockchain in order to be able to do this. So how do we achieve such scale? In reality, as a hardware problem, it's not difficult. YouTube handles hundreds of times this amount of traffic right now. And even so, as I say, that 10 million transactions a second is really just where we're getting started. This is the point at which major use cases can begin to come online. it is reasonable to assume that those use cases will create massive growth in demand once people realize how easy this system is to use. Think of a business that generates a single-use service for 1 cent. Find 1 million customers a day for your 1 cent service, and you've created a $3.6 million a year business. The network's job is to make sure that your 1 cent transactions are efficient and cheap. It's worth mentioning that such a business is impossible today using Visa or MasterCard, as they typically charge around 25 cents per transaction. It's also impossible using most of the major blockchains, as mostly their transactions cost well over $1. In order to bring this vision to reality, the last 5 years have been spent in making scaling improvements of several thousand times over BTC's network capacity. Bitcoin SV network is capable of sustaining long peaks of well over 10,000 transactions per second. And soon the enterprise-grade node architecture, called Teranode, will enable massive scaling, readying the network for millions of transactions per second and eventually billions of transactions per second. And despite being declared dead more times than Bitcoin and for far longer, Moore's law is still alive and well. Since the creation of Bitcoin, computers have become 10 times more powerful, 10 times more memory, 10 times more efficient per unit computing power, yet BTC is held back at just 5 transactions per second for everybody in the whole world. And while computer storage is now well under 2 cents per gigabyte, storing millions of copies of the same thing everywhere does not make your transactions more secure. Security comes from you having ownership and control of your data, being able to maintain your worldview. And this is what is possible with this system. It's a system where you only carry what you need with you at any time. So if you think this is somehow impossible, I would urge you to challenge your assumptions. This can be done today and from an infrastructure perspective easily. The main barrier is software, and where for many years a collective of developers have stalled progress in the name of decentralization, making it impossible to validate all the transactions, by keeping it possible to validate all transactions taking place on a Raspberry Pi toy. And I wish that was a joke. The reason that the BTC network has been held back to 1 megabyte is to prevent the size of the blockchain from becoming so large that somebody using a Raspberry Pi, which I consider a toy, could not validate all of the transactions that have ever happened in history to make sure that their own transaction is valid. Can I ask, does anyone in the room agree with this philosophy? Do you all agree that 1 megabyte is the right limit? Should there be a limit? Do you think that being able to inspect the transactions of a fishmonger in Nigeria makes your own transactions more secure? I've seen the Bitcoin SV network process over 5,000 transactions of my own per second during stress tests that I've run from time to time, and this performance is always improving. So looking at this, how does scale lower cost? So we go back to our 116 million transactions per second, or $100 million a day. That $36.5 billion a year in revenue goes only to the best, most capable nodes on the network. And that's just for financial transactions. Big data, value-add services, it's all on top of this. Providing this network as a service is a profit-driven enterprise. There is no altruism in the Bitcoin network. At scale, it's a tremendous money earner and a tremendous opportunity for human rights, because for just 1 cent per user per day, 10 billion users can be served with financial services. It does consume a terabyte every 10 minutes, but for the revenue, they can afford to manage that. And this is just the beginning. Imagine ubiquitous financial services for just 1 cent per user per day. This changes the lives of billions of people. So in Bitcoin, we all share the ledger. Access to the ledger has to be cheap. And surprise, this drives demand. The BSV blockchain now manages more transactions than almost all other top blockchains combined. In this, nodes provide a service. Anyone who needs access to the network needs to have certainty that the network can accommodate their demand. Without this certainty, growth is impossible. Who can build on a network where the cost of doing business might escalate tenfold within 24 hours? What is needed is an enterprise blockchain that scales on demand, one that takes all comers and prices transactions competitively and in line with the cost of service delivery. In an artificially restricted blockchain, the lack of scale means that users must compete with each other in a fee market for space. Nodes can only make money if enough people are willing to pay artificially high prices for their transactions. Eventually, the transactions get so expensive that demand collapses, and this usually coincides with the price crash of the crypto concerned. With BSV, what we have is an enterprise-ready blockchain that scales no matter what the demand, which is ready for all enterprise use cases, ready for all users, where anyone can try their hand at providing value-add services and where the cost of providing those services is consistently reliable, dependable, and low. Where my neighbours can do as many transactions as they need every day and never be confronted with sudden spikes in price. So, to reiterate, to deliver on the promise of Bitcoin, we must scale. But what about proof of work? Isn't it inefficient? Well, this has become a huge concern, and it's twisted into a Chicken Little falling sky story that is being used to try to shut down the network. But let us look at this objectively. Current networks are skewed by the subsidy of new Bitcoins introduced with each block found. But this will soon run out. Again, we go back to looking at this from the perspective of a fully scaled system. We assume that there is no revenue from the subsidy, i.e. 100% of miner revenue comes from transaction fees. Now, all costs relating to the system infrastructure, fiber, storage, supercomputers capable of processing over 100 million transactions per second must come from these transaction fees. Nodes must invest significantly to ensure that fees are the predominant source of revenue. I've made some assumptions here, but even in a generous scenario, proof of work is not likely to consume more than about 10% of that fee in total. So across each person's 100 transactions per day, just 0.1 cents of electricity will be spent on proof of work. At wholesale rates, this represents just 33 watt-hours of electricity. To give you an idea, this is the equivalent energy used to drive a Tesla, world's cleanest car, about 200 meters. And this is to secure all of your financial activity on a ledger used by the whole world. It seems cheap to me. For this price, you get the security of an immutable ledger, the ability to prove to anyone that you are the author of your transactions, and the support of a global network tailor-made for exactly what you're using it for. But wait, there's more. Proof of work doesn't scale with usage. So that means that the more activity that we pile onto the ledger, the more efficient the proof of work becomes. The cost of usage can be pushed down and the efficiency goes up. Never in history has there been a cheaper, more efficient way of transmitting value-carrying information across the world. So, we now come to the blockchain truth. Who here has questioned the scalability of blockchains at the base layer? Anyone? No? Okay. I was then going to ask, what were you told? Probably to shut up. That's what I was told. Buy the dip. You should be thinking about which tokens you should get. Which ones are better? Don't worry, the next Layer X upgrade will happen soon and scaling will be fixed once and for all. Haven't you heard about proof of stake? We'll solve all these issues because proof of work is hard. Proof of stake breaks my brain. In a situation where you're paid for not doing anything with your money, what is the incentive to spend any money on the network? Only by building the network to scale to accommodate an ever-growing demand can the network remain sustainable. Without a plan to depend on revenue generated by transaction fees, no blockchain can survive. Anyone trying to keep them afloat will only lose their money. In proof of stake, the incentive is to keep your wallet as fat as possible. This means spending as close to zero as you can on infrastructure. As a developer whose platform has a dependency on that infrastructure, how does that make you feel? To know that nobody's spending any money on it. A blockchain is no better than its network. Fees are the money to build that network. Without a properly structured incentive based on massive scale through low-cost transactional services, a blockchain can't generate enough revenue to power its own growth. Satoshi included a mechanism to kickstart the development of the network, which we call the block subsidy. These are the never-before-used bitcoins, which are held in an algorithmic treasury and paid out based on successful proof of work. The subsidy halves every 4 years and will peter out very quickly from here. Miners need to replace that money from somewhere. Do you think that they will be able to charge users of the network an ever-increasing amount of money per transaction to replace that subsidy? I do not. The truth is that the network must scale to support billions of transactions an hour to replace that money. By scaling this way, we create a super hard network that is impervious to almost any attack through simple economics. People will tell you that BTC is super secure thanks to its ultra high price and ultra high proof of work hash rate. But the ultra tiny block size is a hole in its heart. As soon as the network is put under any kind of stress, you get a massive spike in transaction fees, huge congestion, and basically an unusable system. And this is the world's most valuable cryptocurrency. Unable to process more than 5 transactions per second. For everyone in the world at once, pundits would have you believe this is the future. In this graphic, we see what happened in the 2017-2018 hype cycle when BTC was put under more strain than ever before. Transaction fees shot up to heights never before seen, with some blocks only containing transactions that paid over $1,000 or more in fees. As you can see in the bottommost layers, some transactions sat in nodes for weeks, waiting out the higher fee bands to get paid so that they could eventually be confirmed in blocks. So, nodes are miners, a hyper-connected core. The core of the network is made of nodes. Nodes process transactions and timestamp them into blocks. Within this tight cluster, every node talks to every other node. Nodes judge who to connect to based on their fitness, their ability to make blocks. Connections between nodes are private and high bandwidth, and they will need to grow as network traffic grows. Eventually, the network will operate using its own black fiber systems, and these are already being set up to allow the system to scale. Eventually, a blockchain-powered metanet will subsume the role of the internet, creating a user-focused database whose services piggyback as an overlay layer on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. We can talk about this in a future seminar. It's a whole nother conversation in itself, but it is a game changer. At the core of the network, we see what is called a small world network. This small world is comprised directly of the nodes who perform the proof of work. There's a very strong incentive for these nodes to be directly connected to as many other nodes as possible with high bandwidth connections. If someone is telling you that Bitcoin is a mesh, run away from them, for they know not what they say. In Bitcoin, nodes doing proof of work sit an average of 1.2 hops away from every other node doing proof of work. This effectively means that they are almost all directly connected to each other, except for maybe the newest ones being connected to the network. The animation you are watching is a model that shows the formation of a small world network from a set of nodes. It is intended to show that connectivity between nodes grows in a way that promotes connection density and hyperconnectivity. As the network ages, nodes become highly interconnected, reducing the number of hops it takes to reach any point on the network. This is how Bitcoin can successfully transmit vast amounts of traffic between nodes through massive, high bandwidth interconnectivity. And sorry, there is another. Yeah, this is the competition. This is the Lightning Network. This is a model of an attempted payment trying to find a route through the Lightning Network. Who's familiar with Lightning? This is a second layer network over BTC, which is supposed to allow for microtransactions. In reality, the Lightning Network is a completely separate network to BTC. It has a totally different mode of operation within which your transaction is passed through many sets of hands, creating what the financial regulation system calls a network of money handlers. Your transaction must discover a route through this complicated mess in order to be successful. This is in contrast to Bitcoin, where your transaction is final when you send it, and it requires just a tiny fee to be paid. So, there we go. So, everything else that happens on top of the network is a layer controlled and managed by its users. So, looking outside that core node network, which is really where the majority of activity takes place, users communicate directly with users on a peer-to-peer basis using validated packets via a technique called Simplified Payment Verification. Users do not need to contact miners to transact, except once their transaction is final. One party to the transaction, for example, the receiver, broadcasts the transaction, the finalized transaction, to the network when their business is concluded. Almost like a check in the old days, except that this one clears in 3 seconds instead of 3 weeks. Think of it like each item comes in with its own small piece of the blockchain called a Merkle proof. This ties it back to a timestamp generated by nodes on the network. With this topology, the network can become a greater whole, with each user taking ownership and responsibility for their own data and their own transactions. Services then can be easily broken down to regional or even individual overlay systems or zones using a concept we call the working blockchain. In this system, nobody, including miners, ever needs the whole blockchain. And the white paper contains a set of techniques that allow this to be managed effectively. Unfortunately, we don't really have time to go into it today, but there is plenty of educational material about this. This is the truth of Bitcoin. It was never about everybody validating everything, but about taking ownership and responsibility for what is yours. It is about being responsible for your own interactions, about managing ownership in contracts, about promoting honesty. And there is a lot more than just money baked into this system. So now I wanted to cover a few of the systems that are not proof of work. So let's look at some other consensus protocols that are vying for the title of, I don't know what, most effective, most efficient. And when we look at these, it's important to think of the blockchain as infrastructure. So it's got to be managing trillions of daily transactions. This is a major world-changing infrastructure. It costs money to build this thing. And it is the job of the miners who build the nodes and manage them to spend that money. So proof of stake is probably most talked about, but there is no incentive to spend money. In fact, the only incentive is to spend as little money as possible. What incentive is there to spend money on efficiency when there is no incentive to spend money at all? Proof of authority hands all validation rewards to a predefined pool of validators. You get to vote in the choice, but you have very little chance of ever becoming one of the chosen few. Once again, what incentive is there for this elite clique at the core of the network to improve things for the plebs using the system? They already have authority. There is no need to work to build more. In proof of importance, much like a communist military proof of medals on jacket, validation rewards are handed to the validators who can demonstrate the most activity in an easily manipulated gaming system. Metrics such as most transactions and largest transactions contribute along with stake to see how much a given node supports the network. Proof of elapsed time is probably the funniest of these. I like to call this the Rip Van Winkle algorithm. In this, nodes are put to sleep for a short period of time, and if they wake up at just the right moment, they win. What you'll notice with any of these is that there's never any consideration of a node's fitness. There's not one part of any of this that looks at capability or quality or connectivity to the game. So the work of acting as a node on the network is outlined in the white paper section 4 and section 5. Proof of work is a fitness signaling mechanism used by nodes on the network to recognize other nodes who have done the work of building an enterprise-grade mining system. It acts as an incentive mechanism for nodes to improve their interconnectivity, which we'll go into shortly. Proof of work does consume energy that is part of its process. It's like a peacock carrying a large tail around behind it. The activity proves fitness. There is much more to the process. Proof of work is just a signal that the work of block construction has been done. So before we finish up, let's just have a quick look at that. So these are the steps that a node must perform to be a valid competitor on the network. And they aren't just instructions though, as they outline a process by which they can be the most effective competitors on the network. Skipping any one of these steps will make it much harder for them to win blocks, damaging their capability. Step 1, transactions are broadcast to all nodes. So nodes must send transactions to each other. If I receive transactions and then don't send them on, I increase the time it takes for my blocks to be validated, which decreases the chances of them being accepted. It's in my interest that every other node on the network knows every single transaction that I put into my block. Step 2, collect new transactions into a block. I take the transactions that I receive from the network and I build blocks with them. Note that this does not say all transactions. I am not obliged as a node to mine every transaction. I should be aware of every transaction because that material affects my ability to validate other blocks, but I do not have to mine them. So it is important to be aware of all transactions to be a more fit participant. Step 3, find a difficult proof of work. This is where the energy goes. So you'll note we don't even start using proof of work until we've already found new transactions and put them into a block. We then send this block template around to the other machines that do the proof of work. So this is where the energy goes. So at scale, this will be highly optimized and it will consume far less energy per unit transaction than it does today. Far, far, far less. And this is important to understand to be a competitive node in the system. The nodes who do the proof of work in the most efficient way, using the least amount of energy, are demonstrating a higher level of fitness to other nodes on the network. This improves their interconnectivity because it will incentivize other nodes to connect to them. Step 4, once I find a proof of work, I send it to all other nodes. This is where the ultra connectivity of the network comes in. This is the main driving incentive. Once I've spent a lot of money finding my difficult proof of work, I have to let every single other node on the network know about it as quickly as possible, because every millisecond spent sending that message around is a millisecond that they spend competing with my block. So I need to be careful here. I have to get my message out to everyone as quickly as possible. Nodes will accept my block only if all transactions in it are valid and not already spent. So nodes will accept my block if it's valid, and this is where I need to be careful. If I mine illegal transactions or submit otherwise invalid blocks, Other nodes will reject my work. And if I keep doing it, they might just disconnect me from the rest of the network. In step 6, and this is the most important part of the network consensus, the nodes who do the mining vote by choosing my block to build upon. If my block isn't valid, nodes who build blocks build somewhere else, and my block is rejected. There is no validator, there is no Raspberry Pi, there is no home node network supplying validation into the miners. Miners are the only ones who have a say here. This is about enterprise systems competing in a dynamic 10-minute repeating game for profit. In this game, proof of work is important, but it is worthless without a capable and effective node that is well connected to the network. A node must be able to gather, validate, collate, and timestamp all of the transactions taking place in the whole world in real time. This is what proof of work incentivizes. This is why it is the only consensus system that will lead to a global transactional system, peer-to-peer cash system. So that's about all we have time for today. Thank you very much. Before I finish up, if you're interested in further research, please check out the Bitcoin SV Academy, www.bitcoinsv.academy. I create content for the site. It has a multitude of courses on there covering Bitcoin theory, infrastructure, enterprise, digital signatures, hash functions, Merkle trees, and more. It is all free of charge and it is open to everyone. There is also the Bitcoin SV Wiki, which is used as a source of truth for all of our educational materials. So it's a fantastic developer resource. It's highly technical. You can check it out at wiki.bitcoinsv.io. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. I have time for Q&A if anyone has questions.
Thank you, Brandon, for this very interesting perspective on Bitcoin and blockchain. Questions?
I have a question. You mentioned that bridges are causing problems in this space, and can you expand on that? And why is that the case? Because there are several blockchain platforms already out there, and all these platforms wants to have interoperability, meaning that they want to switch from one currency to another or do cross blockchain exchanges and all that. So given that requirement, how do you see this space evolving? Are you saying that the bridges are not the right approach, or there should be only one blockchain? Or can you expand on that?
Essentially, what I'm saying is that there is one blockchain that is capable of doing everything that any other blockchain is trying to do. It's capable of doing it for a very small fraction of the cost that you need to do it on another blockchain. And because everything can happen in the one place, there's no need to have any bridging system to migrate from X blockchain to Y blockchain via some other connection blockchain, and which is all too frequently getting hacked and having all the money taken out of it, and they've created a real mess. And they're taking real people's money. And so there is a place where you can go where you don't need to do any of that. Where there are systems in place that allow you today to do everything that you're trying to do on these other blockchains for a tiny fraction of the cost. And it's ready to go now. We have all kinds of different smart contracting techniques. You have the full power of the Bitcoin scripting language, which is fully Turing complete. We didn't really get into that, but we can. I'm just in the middle of writing a course for the Bitcoin Academy, which goes into how to create Turing complete processes using Bitcoin script, and it's not especially complex. You do need to understand how it works, but once you figure it out, it's very, very easy to apply to a multitude of use cases.
So thanks for that. And my next question was on smart contracts. I'm familiar with smart contracts in Ethereum because it's one of the dominant players in that smart contract space. And you said the Bitcoin scripting is also equally powerful. And can you compare and contrast, or can you give us sort of the key features of Bitcoin's smart
Sure.
contract? Yeah.
So Bitcoin and Ethereum operate on quite fundamentally different, I guess, architectures. So in Bitcoin, we have a UTXO model, whereas Ethereum is much more account-based. I won't speak too much to Ethereum, except to say that the smart contracting language that they use does seem to me to be a little bit dangerous, and just in the ways that a lot of these smart contracts have been not even necessarily hacked, but like some guy who'll go in and say, oh, look, there's something here, and they'll tweak it, and all of a sudden, $500 million is locked irretrievably, and we need to fork the blockchain and create now 2 blockchains because we disagree that you should be allowed to do that. And, it's a bit of a mess. So in the UTXO model, when you have a system that needs thousands of users, rather than creating a single smart contract that has 1,000 out points which each user connects to, we just create 1,000 UTXOs, one for each user, and each user is responsible for managing their own UTXO. And because of the utility of Bitcoin script, we can actually build those UTXOs to have all kinds of features. So we can have recovery methods, we can have multi-signature, we can have anything that we need. We can inject quite large data items. So I don't know if you recall, there was one transaction that had a 320 megabyte video just directly injected into that transaction. And so it's really all about, now, unfortunately, it's still very early days, and most people haven't really come to grips with how the UTXO system works. So, the opportunity is now to get in and become really good at this. The course I'm developing is about Bitcoin scripting, and I'm serious when I say I can count on one hand the number of people I know who are capable of Bitcoin script, and or maybe 4 now that James is picking it up so quickly. But it is really not that difficult. If you know anything about assembly language, you can pick it up quite easily, and then it's just about understanding within the architecture of Bitcoin, where is script applied? So what is happening? It can be quite complicated, because when you spend a transaction, the later part of the script comes from an earlier generated output. And so that sort of people struggle to conceptualize that. But once you get on top of that, it's actually not that complicated to develop reasonably complex applications.
Okay, thank you.
So Bitcoin SV has been attacked before, right? So due to the lower hash rate, what's it like at the moment?
Well, these attacks are really just kind of to generate bad press. But the thing about a 51% attack is that the only thing that they can be used for is for the attacker to try and trick somebody into accepting funds that they've really sent elsewhere. And that was what happened in the attack last year. Someone sent funds to an exchange, then 51% attacked the network to send the funds back to themselves. But what happened was the honest miners on the network rejected the attack chain and brought the network back onto the honest chain where the money was sent to the exchange. And so the attack ultimately failed on the network. I look at this as more like a propaganda thing. It's not a real attack. It's not a huge risk to anyone using the network. I don't have any lack of confidence in its ability to, deal with this sort of thing. It's, not a big deal.
But still, I think it happened like 3 times. It's not one time, so it's a little bit controversial. But
it's only controversial because the news made a big deal out of it. But every time what happened is that the honest nodes rejected the attack chain, and then published information in public saying there's an attack chain within sort of half an hour of it happening, and allowed all of the services connected to the network to also reject the attack chain. And so, you know, that's the reality of it. Yes, it was an attack, but it was stopped very quickly, and there were very few negative impacts apart from publicity, which of course was seized upon because everyone loves to attack Bitcoin SV however they can. And so, you know, the reality is a 51% attack is not really a very effective means of doing anything bad to the network. You're only going to cost yourself money. No, you have the option of being dishonest or being honest, and it's far more profitable to be honest. So what's happening now is those guys have basically been taken to court. It's going to cost them a lot of money for what they did. So, you know, that's the outcome. It doesn't affect me, never affected any of my transactions. And the reality is they can't attack your transactions. Your transactions are secure by the time they get sent to the network. There's nothing that they can do to undo your digital signature and somehow send your money somewhere else. They can only pretend to send you some money, then attack the network to send it back to themselves.
So I had a question. In your talk, you mentioned a couple of times services.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned blockchain as a service at one point. So how do you see that working? The models I've seen for blockchain as a service, I wasn't very convinced about because, you know, it tends to centralize. You know, there is a service provider that says we'll host the blockchain for you and give you all the services. For that, in those cases, it defeats the purpose of using blockchain. So, and it's not Bitcoin SV, but it's another blockchain. So I'm just curious about your perspective on that.
Well, so Elas is a blockchain as a service company. We provide blockchain services to our customers. So our customers, they don't have to buy BSV, they don't have to hold BSV. Their customers certainly don't need any BSV to use their platforms. And we do not run a node. So we don't host a full copy of the blockchain. We have a working blockchain which contains all of the transactions that are relevant to the activity that's taking place within our platform. With those transactions, we keep Merkle proofs that link every one of those transactions back to a timestamp generated by a node on the network. And so for us, that's an exceptionally efficient way of running things because we're only concerned with the data that directly relates to us and the provision of our service. And so, you know, really, to me, that's the way that all services should be headed, is to having that working blockchain where they only have the information that really is important to them. There's no need for everybody to have a copy of everything. And so with that, you know, yes, our customers are centralized with us because we're the only company who has the capability of managing things in the way that we do. However, the transactions that we generate go on chain, and we have essentially an agreement with our customer that if they no longer want our services, that we will provide information to a different service provider to be able to go and implement the systems needed to grab hold of the ledger that we create and start using it on their behalf. And so, you know, we consider that sort of a best practices model. I mean, what is centralization and what is decentralization? I think the terms are very misunderstood. You know, to me, decentralization means that I can transact with you and we can go back and forth multiple times, we can negotiate, and there's no third party. We're not going via a bank, we're not going via some other institution. Even our devices are directly communicating IPv6 peer-to-peer. And then at the end, when we agree and we both signed, we broadcast to the network. That really is decentralization. It's not this idea that, you know, everybody has a copy of everything and we're somehow safe because of that. Actually, that's really dangerous.
So in your model, the customers that are using your services, their transactions are purely stored on your machines, or are some other transactions on the public? Or
oh yeah, so they go to the public ledger. So they create the transaction within our system, and maybe there's, potentially they're doing things within our system, and we have details of that we don't broadcast to the blockchain. But we will keep, we'll say take the details of what they're doing in our system, and we'll generate a hash of that, and we'll put that into the transaction so that at some point in the future, they can come back and say, hey, what happened in this particular interaction here? And we can pull that transaction from the blockchain. And, in fact, we have a copy of it, so we just pull the transaction out of our repository. But we also have a timestamp that shows that it was sent to the blockchain before a particular time. And we can say, well, here's the data that we recorded, here's the hash that validates it, and here's the transaction that shows that this is what took place at this date and time. And that's what this is about.
Any more questions?
Raj, there are some guys on Zoom.
There are some questions? Okay, I
I
think
don't
we
know,
have.
I mean, just check if they have any.
Yeah. Just to make sure.
Oh, sure.
Any questions from participants on Zoom? There should be, yeah, but I guess the silence means no. All right, so with that, we'll thank Brendan again.